go ahead. Good evening, everyone. I'll call the meeting to order at 6:02 and recognize with great respect and humility that we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity, recognizing that we also serve in the lands and territories of Snuneymuxw and Stiminas peoples. We have no transfer of items to the open meeting agenda. There is an addition motion under 12.1, committee report from the Business Committee regarding a crossing guard at a Cole North Oyster. Are there any other additions, deletions, or change in order? Seeing none, is there any objection to approving the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. 7.1, approval of the minutes. That the minutes from the Special Board of Education meeting held on October 27th, 2020, and the regular Board of Education meeting held on October 28th, 2020 be adopted. Do I have a mover? Moved by Trustee Barron, and a second by Trustee O'Neill. Are there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, is there any objection to passing the motion? The motion carries unanimously. Section 8, 72.3 report, 8.1, that the section 72.3 report from the closed board meeting on October 28th, 2020, and the special closed board meeting on November 18th, 2020 be received. The mover? Moved by Trustee Wilkinson, seconded by Trustee Keller. Is there any objection to the motion? The motion passes unanimously. Announcements and reminders. Annual general meeting of the Board of Education on December 2nd at 5 p.m. The Education Committee meeting will be December 2nd at 6 p.m. Business Committee meeting December 9th at 6 p.m. Board of Education for December on the 19th. Pardon me, the 16th. Our schools close for winter break on December 19th, and we reopen on January 4th. We have no presentations this evening, so we'll be moving on to correspondence. 11.1. That the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Lady Smith, refer the correspondence from J. Dube to staff for response. Do we have a mover? Moved by Trustee Berzovich. Is there a second? Seconded by Trustee Keller. Trustee Stanley, you have a question on the motion?
Sorry, I was just trying to type. The question is not on the motion. The question is on the topic.
We don't typically discuss the topics of the correspondence at this point in the meeting. Was there something that we can refer or come back to at a later time?
Yep. I'm wondering if we can explore or hear about the response, you know, how do you say, the actions to close the schools to rentals and to limit access was something that was a decision made, you know, early learning COVID, or actually no, but okay, I'm wondering if we have more information about that and if we can, you know, with regards to this letter, see if there's any opportunities for having access to our schools for those spaces.
What I'll do is pause, and I'm going to refer related questions to this topic, not to the specific letter itself, but relations to the topic of facility rentals related to COVID, to item number 13.1, where we're talking about the COVID-19 update. You should be able to get your answers there.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Are there any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Anyone object? Is there any objections to the motion? The motion carries unanimously. 11.2, that the Board of Education of School District number 68 and Emma Ladysmith refer the correspondence from DPAC to the board chair for response. Is there a mover? Moved by Trustee Keller and seconded by Trustee Higginson. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries. 11.3, that the Board of Education of School District number 68 and Emma Ladysmith refer the correspondence from S. Shop to the board chair for response. Is there a mover? Moved by Trustee Wilkinson. Do I have a second? Seconded by Trustee Robinson. Is there any objection to the motion? Okay, the motion carries. 12, committee reports, 12.1, Business Committee, Trustee Keller.
Yes, thank you. We have two motions this evening, and the first one is that the Board of Education of School District number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, approve the demolition of the Franklin Street Gym located at 421 Franklin Street, Nanaimo, BC.
So moved by Trustee Keller. Do we have a second?
Just, sorry, point of order that I will be abstaining from this. Thank you.
Okay, so just bringing everything up, everyone, 1 second. So we have a second from Trustee Stanley. Did you want to motivate the motion, Trustee Keller?
At this point, I think we've received a staff report at our last business committee meeting that included all of the rationale and staff recommendations, so I don't have anything further to add at this time.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? Trustee Barron?
Thank you. I'm now questioning the placement of my question. Yes, this feels like the appropriate place, and thank you for allowing me to pause there. I had a question specific to this motion, as I'm wondering if we could get further information around because this building has such a historical background, specifically as the neutral zone. I'm wondering if I could please get some clarification around any updates that may have occurred since our last discussion around planning with Tillicum-Lalem around the neutral zone, and if there would be any impact with the neutral zone's current placement, and if there be any movement required in it being utilized as a swing space. I guess I'm just wondering, because this motion would ultimately demolish the building that was previously used for this program, I just want to understand and clearly articulate what we are doing to work with the neutral zone moving forward.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer Walsh.
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. If I could please ask Mr. Sabo to come on and provide a response.
Thank you.
Good evening. Through the chair. So the school district has a mechanism called a transition committee, and we have had a number of transition meetings with Solaire, and on that meeting with Solaire principal and staff reps, and on that committee also is Brett Hughes, the VP of the Learning Alternatives program, the two main users of the space in the building. Solaire is anticipated to use half of the gymnasium at Woodlands, and Learning Alternatives shares a home ec room with Tillicum-Laleham Aboriginal Friendship Center. So the gymnasium use by Solaire is going to potentially impact the use by Tillicum-Laleham. And in the transition committee, it was acknowledged that this use exists. And while we haven't drilled down into details, it wasn't anticipated that this was an issue that we couldn't schedule between Solaire and Learning Alternatives use of the 2 gyms at Woodlands. So there's no anticipated movement required with Solaire moving in and the use of Woodlands as swing space.
Great, thank you. Do you have a follow-up question, Trustee Barron?
No, that answers my question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Is there any opposition to the motion? The motion carries unanimously with Trustee Higginson abstaining from the vote. Trustee Keller, I do have 3 motions. If you'd like to move the second one, and I will be able to read the third one as I have it up on my screen for you.
Thank you, Chair McKay.
Go ahead.
That the Board of Education of School District number 68 Nanaimo Ladysmith write to the Cowichan Valley Regional District and Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure requesting that they fund a crossing guard at Nicole North Oyster at pickup and drop-off times to support student safety.
Thank you. Trustee Berzovich has seconded the motion. Did you want to motivate the motion, Trustee Keller?
Quickly, I suppose, so as the board's aware, we received a report at our meeting, our business committee meeting, regarding the status of the concerns related to pedestrian crossing safety at Nicole North Oyster, and their recommendations for the staff report are presented in the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the motion? Trustee Higginson?
Thank you. So just to be clear, the motion that was missing from the agenda is going to be read next?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to vote against this motion because I believe that there is little chance of success for this request, but also because I believe that there is a lot more that needs to be done at North Oyster than long-term. And I believe we would have better chances of success at achieving that long-term infrastructure changes that are actually part of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and the CBRD's sort of joint responsibilities with us having a school there. So I believe that we should wait to make one thoughtful submission rather than a bunch of small little submissions that may impact our ability to have success with the longer submissions, that we can deal with this in the long range facilities plan. So I will be voting against the motion.
Okay. Are there any other speakers to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those opposed, please show your opposition to the motion in the chat. Okay, so the motion fails with Trustees Higginson, Keller, Robinson, Stanley, and Barron opposed. Just going to pause to take a couple notes here. Okay. All right, so I will read the third motion from the Business Committee and ask Trustee Keller if he would like to be our mover. That the Board of Education of School District number 68 Nanaimo Ladysmith direct staff to prepare a report for the December Business Committee on the cost of a temporary crossing guard for Nicole North Oyster to support student safety during pickup and drop-off. Trustee Keller, did you want to move that motion? Moved by Trustee Keller. Do I have a second? Seconded by Trustee Higginson. Trustee Keller, did you want to motivate the motion?
Yes, please, to the chair. I think this would be an appropriate approach to determine what the actual cost of providing a district-funded crossing guard at this location. And from that perspective, I would support the motion as proposed.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion on the motion?
Sorry, me, I just can't get my comments in fast enough.
Trustee Higginson?
Thank you. I do just want to reiterate that there is a safety issue as identified by the report that was part of the business committee agenda last week at North Oyster that has been exacerbated by COVID and the desire of families to drive their children rather than bus them. And so I believe that it is incumbent upon us to consider this as a temporary solution to the issues that have been exacerbated by COVID. So I'm in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Keller?
Thank you. I'm not sure if this would require an amendment or not, but I've come to learn that specifically at Rock City as an example, and maybe some of our other facilities, that they have some student volunteers working as crossing guards with staff, is my understanding. And I'm wondering if someone could potentially advise sort of how that works, and if it is a possibility elsewhere, if that could be included as part of this report that comes forward.
So I can speak to that to begin with, and then perhaps the Secretary Treasurer would like to add to that. During the business committee discussions, we did agree that that our district staff would include in the report non-cost options, such as what you're referring to. Secretary Treasurer, did you have anything further that you wanted to add to that? I don't believe we need an amendment to the motion in order to accomplish that information.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we were going to provide what potential alternatives that there are in the system. The one thing, though, that may require a motion is if there was actually if the business committee wanted to see a plan on how it would roll out at North Oyster, because we would need to talk to the school, we would need to do more in depth. Like we were intending to provide the kind of generic alternatives rather than how that would specifically look in the context of North Oyster, because we don't know, the volunteers, we don't know what the student body looks like, etc. for an actual rollout there.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Trustee Stanley?
So follow up from Secretary Treasurer Walsh's comment there, because the reason that I was, I support this motion because I was also aware that those non-cost options were coming forward. So I want to make sure that we're going to get the necessary information. So to clarify, without a motion, would we be able to understand the viability of those non-cost options for North Oyster? Meaning, is it actually workable at that school? Or would we need a motion to have it to see if those were, so rather than, hey, these are the possibilities, what I'm interested in is, this is the other possibilities that will work at North Oyster. I just want to make sure that that's the piece we're getting. Not the how, but the possibility.
I think we can include that and potentially ask Ms. Tate or Mr. Cunyon to join us as well, or make sure that they've reviewed the information that's being provided.
Thank you.
Without a motion, to clarify?
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay, thank you. Trustee O'Neill?
Thank you. I think that answered the question. I may need to have this motion read to me again. because I mean, I want this to be specific in that we're addressing the issue that's at hand, which is specifically to Cole North Oyster. And while I do understand, you know, the intention of the discussion at the business committee was to look at the non-cost, I mean, you know, all options, I really would like to keep this sort of focused in. So perhaps that's in the motion or perhaps not. So I would like to hear the motion again, please.
Okay, I'm going to read it aloud. That the Board of Education of School District 68 and Nanaimo Ladysmith directs staff to prepare a report for the December Business Committee on the cost of a temporary crossing guard for a Cole North Oyster to support student safety during pickup and drop-off. Do you have a follow-up, or is that okay?
No, that's okay. And I can see it's written there too, so I'll mull on it a bit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other discussion on the motion? Seeing no further discussion on the motion, I'll call the questions. If there's anyone opposed to the motion, if you could put your opposition in the chat. Seeing no opposition, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We have nothing from the Education Committee this month, so moving on to senior staff reports. 13.1, Superintendent Scott Saywell, COVID-19 update.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to take this opportunity to provide a rather brief update on some happenings with COVID-19 over the last few weeks. And next week during Education Committee meeting, Learning Services will do a more comprehensive update. I wanted to share a few things though. So as everyone is aware that we've had a pretty tough last couple of weeks, 22 exposures in 5 of our schools. You may have also heard recently that Victoria, Port Alberni, and most recently Parksville Qualicum has joined us on the Island Health School Exposure website, and you've probably seen that in the news. What you might not know is that now Barsby and Dover are off the list since their last exposure was more than 14 days ago. Frank J. Ney and Randerson Ridge will be off the list tomorrow, and Ladysmith Secondary will be off the list on Friday. And certainly while we're hoping to not have any further exposures, it's quite possible that we will, of course. And as Dr. Henry and Dr. Allison have told us, school exposures are really a reflection or a mirror of what's happening in the community. And we have quite a few more cases in the community. So over the first, I don't know if you knew this, but over the first few months, and in fact, up until really the beginning of November, we were at a rate of about, on average, 1 COVID case per day on the island. In November, we had 200 cases alone, which is about 8 cases per day. And the majority of those, you might be aware, were found in the Mid-Island. So more cases means more possibility of school exposures. And remember, the definition of a school exposure is a single person, staff or student with a lab-confirmed COVID-19 infection who attended school during their infectious period. Another important thing to remember is that transmission is not happening in schools. In fact, provincially, given the hundreds of school exposures, only 2% translated into a school transmission. So that's a very small number, and clearly the protocols that we have in place are working and schools are safe. In related news, I wanted to share that I am incredibly impressed with the calm, caring, confident, and compassionate leadership that is exhibited in our schools. This has been a very challenging time for leadership, and calming families once there's an exposure in school is an important thing that principals have been undertaking, and they've never wavered in their support of our return to school plan. or Dr. Henry's recommendations. So we're following those protocols. Once the news of an exposure is public, what happens typically in schools, we've seen the following day, we get typically in all of our schools about a 50% absenteeism rate. That slowly goes, and even in schools in surrounding areas, about 25% absenteeism the following days. Dover and Barsby, I mentioned, are now off the exposure list, and those absenteeism rates are now back to the normal range. So it takes a little time, but schools do get back to normal. Our question and answer period with Dr. Allison that we posted online, I know helped a great deal to control fears, and I believe helped absenteeism as well. Randerson Ridge, by the way, was at our highest point, and as people are aware, they've had the most exposures and clusters, in fact. And so they had a high of 65% absenteeism, but that too is starting to get back into the normal range. As far as the transition learning program goes, all but approximately 20 families have now transitioned back to their neighborhood school or into a distributed learning program. Those families that have not made a decision yet, their neighborhood schools and district staff continue to try and connect with them to provide some educational program. Recently, we hired 5 teachers last week to Island Connect Ed. We keep growing those numbers, of course, as exposures were exhibited in schools. We don't want to do that forever, of course, because we know that, number one, it's a financial burden, because what we do is we're paying for a seat in a neighborhood school, and then we're paying for another seat for a child in the DL program. Certainly, we can't continue to do that, but it's not also a financial burden. It's also I think an issue with education, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. I think parents believe that because of what happened in June, which was teachers doing their very best as students came back in June to get them through the very end of a course. Now we're starting courses. Learning online has rigor to it. It requires students and families to be absolutely committed to home learning. And it really requires students to be self-directed, independent learners, particularly at secondary schools where we're in a quarter system. Time, of course, is now 10 weeks, half the time of a normal semestered course. And it's rigorous, and it's even, some say, even harder online. So what we saw after the first quarter is that in some secondary schools, only 50% of these students finished the course that they were in distributed learning. So now in the second quarter, they have their 2 second quarter courses in many cases, and now they're carrying a course or 2 from the first quarter. Not ideal. So I appreciate that these are difficult times for parents and they're required to make difficult decisions, but DL is not the solution in every case. And I'm an advocate of DL, by the way, and I always have been. I believe every student at some time in their career needs to learn how to learn online and become a self-directed independent learner. But you really need supports for that. And if you're going full-time at home, it's a family situation, and not every family is set up to do that. Finally, it's time, and we're doing a little bit of this work to start reimagining the future of education. Timetables, block schedules, curriculum, resources, assessment practices, remote hybrid learning options. We certainly don't want to waste this crisis trying to get back to normal. Where in Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools, we graduated 83% of students last year and 70% of Indigenous students. And we're not, we don't want to go back to a system that is average. So we want to maybe take what we've learned from this pandemic and think about how we might do education differently. So we can, as I say, we continue to, I talked with Tim Davey and his learning services team. We discuss what it's going to be like after the pandemic, what elements we'll keep, what we'll throw away, and certainly what we can reimagine. That's the brief update. Again, Learning Services will provide a more fulsome update at Education Committee next week. And I forgive me, Trustee Higginson, but I don't mean to put you on the spot, and perhaps you're ill prepared, so my apologies. But I do know that you have some, you've been in contact with the Provincial Health Office, and you have some statistics that that might be okay to share if you have them ready. And again, sorry to put you on the spot, but it might be helpful.
Trustee Higginson? Certainly, I actually have the information because I carry it around with me everywhere right now, because I think that these statistics are really important in our role as trustees, which I've said before, I think one of my most important jobs is I have two filters. Will this improve confidence in public education, and will this improve student achievement? Those are the two filters that I use to make every decision. And so the statistics that I've been able to be provided with and have shared out with trustees across the province in my provincial role demonstrate that schools, despite the rise in transmissions in BC, schools continue to be very, very, very safe places. And I can't say enough varies on that. What the statistics show is that as of last week, these are statistics from last Wednesday, that there had been 549 school exposures as of last Wednesday. So that number is probably closer to 600 now. But there had only been 12 in-school transmissions. And I think that's an important statistic for us to think about, because in the K-12 system across BC, including the, the public, the private, the independent system, there's just under 700,000 people between staff and students every day. And so since September, there had been 12 in-school transmissions. And so the reason that I think that that's really important is because what that data had showed, and what the Provincial Health Office shared with presidents of all the groups last week, was that the safety plans that are in place in schools are working. And what they are finding is that when this rise in transmission is generally happening as a result of unstructured sort of in-home interactions, and that when transmissions are happening in workplaces, it's generally as a result of a breakdown or an absence of a safety plan. And so those safety plans that we have in place in schools are overwhelmingly effective and are working very, very well. And I'm just trying to look through here if there's anything else that I need to talk about a bit. That there is, the statistic that we are seeing a lot is that there has definitely been an increase in children acquiring COVID since September, but that increase still remains much lower than the general population, and that children are predominantly acquiring COVID in their homes and from unstructured community settings or social activity in the community where there are no protocols or safety plans in place. So our schools continue to be as they have always been, but they are very safe places for students to be. And I hope that we can find ways through our excellent communications department to get that information out. And I do want to, having said that, acknowledge that as a parent myself, frustration, fatigue, anxiety, all those emotions as a parent when we're trying to make the best decisions we can for our children. This is a very challenging time for all of us, and we're all doing our best as we can, but schools are safe. Right now, schools are safe places. Thank you. Thank you. We have a question from Trustee Stanley for Trustee Higginson.
Thanks for both of you for that. I'll focus on Trustee Higginson just quickly because I want to clarify with the 12 in-school transmissions that's just referring to among students. Is that correct?
My understanding is that is not just among students. That is 12 in-school transmissions, period.
Total.
Okay. That was as of
very impressive.
A week ago.
Yeah, it is a very impressive statistic when we're talking about an extremely contagious virus. We're not seeing transmission in our schools. It is an extremely impressive statistic that I'm glad that you shared with us tonight, and I completely agree that this is something we need to sing from the hills, because you know, all of us parents and caring adults and community members have been incredibly, you know, traumatized by this in some ways. And so I really appreciate you sharing that information. I'll save my kudos for Superintendent Saywell when I ask my question later. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Trustee Higginson. Let's see. Trustee Stanley, you're back up for your question for Superintendent Saywell.
Okay, so I will start with some kudos again. Superintendent Saywell, that was one of the most impressive superintendent reports I have ever seen. Thank you. You answered a lot of the questions that I had. I think a lot of the questions that are in our community, and I'm very much appreciative for the information that you shared, both about COVID, but also from that educational perspective. So I do want to follow up on an aspect that you touched on, which is the rigors of DL. As great as our program is, you know, the reality is it's not for everyone. And another reality is that, you know, parents trying to make the best decisions for their kids and kids trying to make the best decisions for themselves in a major global crisis is not the easiest way to make decisions. And so there has, as you've noted, there's been reactions to exposures, and that's completely and totally understandable because we're all just trying to do our best here, and sometimes this information is scary, and of course we want to act in a way that just assures our children's safety. But what I'm wondering is this, is that when people make a decision to move to DL, and for those that they find out that it doesn't work for them, what are their options? What can, if anything, parents do in the situation, or parents and students do in the situation that they've moved to DL and they found that it's just simply not a good match?
Superintendent?
Yeah, thank you for the question. For people who don't know, I spent the better part of a decade as the district principal of our distributed learning program. So I want to repeat, I'm a really strong advocate for DL. I think every student in their educational career needs to take a course or two, and full-time for families who are interested in that type of learning, for students to be able to learn how to learn online and become independent, self-directed learners. For those students who are in DL and they're not experiencing success, or it's too difficult for the family to manage, they need to tell the DL principal, let them know that they're interested in going back to their neighborhood school, and we can start that process. Presently, we have seats available in schools for children to come back. And so right now is a good time to make that decision if parents are thinking that, okay, it's not really working, and this new information, and thanks again to Trustee Higginson in her role as president of BCSTA, it really comes in handy sometimes here. They need to start that process and get back to their neighborhood school. And so maybe with all the statistics we're sharing, parents are having second thoughts.
Trustee Stanley, do you have a follow-up? Great, thank you. Trustee Barron has our next question.
Thank you, through the chair, to our superintendent. Thanks for all that information. And actually, you touched on exactly what my question was going to be around. You had mentioned the importance of all students having access to the ability to take a course or two in DL throughout their educational experience. And this was exactly what I was hoping to dig a little deeper into and to understand a little bit better as parents and students and educators move through this pandemic together. I think it's really important for us to understand what options are available. And one option that I'm trying to understand a little bit more about, and know that others are as well in our community, is around this idea of cross-enrollment, where a student is taking one class in distributed learning and then another one in the bricks and mortar school, as an example. What does that look like for our secondary students Are there different practices in place depending on the grades, and have we adapted that since COVID?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Great question. No, nothing has changed in the DL world as far as cross enrollment is concerned. So the Ministry of Education allows students to be cross enrolled in grades 10 to 12. So that still exists, and I really do encourage students in those grades to take a course or two. In fact, most of our students, once they graduate, have taken a course or two. I think is a great introduction. Trustee Barron, you've probably taken a course online. I've taken a course online. I'm in one right now. You know, you can't get away from it. So I think it's a great way for students to learn how to learn online.
Do you have a follow-up question, Trustee Barron?
I do, yes, thank you. I'm wondering if we can have some insights into understanding. I know that the system goes from K to 9, and maybe could you clarify a little bit more why students in grade 8 and 9 aren't able to participate in cross enrollment through the DL program?
Well, it's a bit of a thank you through you, Madam Chair. It's a bit of a funding conundrum in a way. So the Ministry of Education funds students full-time in DL from K to 9, and they will fund by course in grades 10 to 12. So, you know, we haven't had many students in the past in grades 8 or 9 who have tried to cross enroll. And we have tried to accommodate those students who have. And you know, maybe at some point down the road we could have the principal of Island Connect Ed come and do a presentation to us, to an education committee sometime, and talk a little bit more about you know, the nuances of distributed learning.
Great, thank you. Do we, Trustee Stanley?
Thank you. So, slight related topic, different. I'm just wondering, you know, we've learned a lot about COVID since March, and how scary it was back then, and we've learned a lot about the transmission and risks and degree of risk. So I'm wondering if there has been any reconsideration, or if we were able to reconsider the rentals of our buildings, if that is something that has been discussed either provincially, or if it's a possible conversation that can be had locally.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
I see Secretary Treasurer Walsh as well, and so I'll begin by saying, yeah, some of the programs, Strong Start programs and others that initially we weren't allowing, now we're starting to, and we provided those in other ways and other venues. Now we're looking at having programs like that back in our schools. But also I know there's a consideration that Secretary Treasurer Walsh will speak to around rentals as well.
Sure thing, through you, Chair. So first of all, we do put this on our EOC committee, our meeting to discuss all things COVID, probably once a month to come back to this to see if anything has changed with respect to how rentals are being treated. We're keeping in contact with our partners in other school districts. I will ask Mr. Sabo to join us, but one of the fundamental problems, particularly for evening rentals for us, is that you know, the Clorox spraying has been something that's provided our community a lot of, it's assuaged a lot of fears, knowing how seriously we're taking our cleaning protocols. And so really the way that we're doing it and the timing of it really prevents evening rentals of any kind because of that. But perhaps I'll ask Mr. Sabo to jump on here and provide a little bit more context. While he's popping on. I will say again, we are continuing to monitor rentals and having those discussions about whether we can expand access. But currently, of course, given the increased numbers recently, we haven't delved too seriously into that. But perhaps Mr. Sabo can provide a little bit more comment.
Thank you through the chair. I think Secretary Treasurer Walsh has covered most of my points. I think that we're starting to look very closely at how we might be able to allow a limited amount of rentals back in. We are continuing to stay in touch with school districts to find out what solutions they have in place and if they would work in our district. And we haven't got to the point yet through our EOC that we would allow those rentals back in. Very much like Superintendent's comment about other programs, we're sort of taking it step by step. Thank you.
Did you have a follow-up, Trustee Stanley?
No, thank you for that information.
Thank you. I have a follow-up to it. Something I just thought of. I guess when staff start exploring the option of having rentals coming back into our schools, given, you know, some of the things that we've seen in other communities where perhaps safety plans are not adhered to or gathering sizes are too large, etc. I would hope that we would understand as a board what protocols would be in place for us to ensure that any safety plans that are in place by renters are followed. Just as a component of that planning piece, I felt I needed to say that out loud this evening. So just thoughts for the future.
Sure.
Secretary Treasurer? Sure,
through you, Madam Chair. And to be clear, we do have renters in our facilities in the sense that we have long-term partners in before and after school care as an example. We're requiring those long-term partners to provide us with their safety plans in order to continue. And obviously that happened in September, and now we're there at the same time as they are, and so there's lots of monitoring going on. So that is something that is front of mind, and even for the folks that are going to want to rent externally, like the fields, etc. Those are still groups as spring comes that will be, assuming that the vaccine is not widely spread by that point, that we would anticipate requiring safety plans, even renting outdoors.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions on this section of our agenda? Seeing none, I have a comment from Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. Statistics that I gave are, you know, stats in this time, in this era, are ever changing. And so I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm sure that if somebody wanted to, they could go out and find a different number today, because the number was given to me last week and it was probably 2 days old by the time I got it. But that the intent is not to focus on specific numbers, but that on the overall understanding that demonstrates that the school safety plans are working very, very effectively, and it's the absence of a safety plan or the breakdown of a safety plan where we do see transmission. So I just wanted to reiterate that those statistics, you know, I'm sure that somebody, if this is a very politically charged and very emotional time, so depending on actual numbers is tricky in this era. But what we do know is that they the theme of what I was trying to imply or impose is that impress, what's the word I'm looking for right now, I'm tired, is that the school plans are working well. And so I hope that that's what people can get out of that, as opposed to focus on 1 or 2 numbers that were stated. They're always changing right now. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Superintendent Sabo, last comments?
You know what, I wasn't prepared, but you know, I see Trustee Stanley on the screen, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention concerns about what we might call a looming mental health epidemic. And so we continue to help staff recognize early warning signs. We building relationships, try to create safe learning environments and support our vulnerable students, and get an appreciation and understanding for the resources that are available, and ensuring people know how to access them. So overall, we're still working with learning services around again, what I would call maybe it's already here, a real health crisis, a mental health crisis. So front of mind all the time.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
Thanks for your report this evening. So moving on our agenda, we have no unfinished business, which takes us to new business 15.1. And there's a proposed motion for the board to contemplate that the Board of Education of School District number 68 Nanaimo Ladysmith direct the board chair to write a letter of congratulations to recently elected MLAs on behalf of the Board of Education. Is there anyone that would like to move it? Trustee Stanley moves the motion. Is there a seconder? Trustee Berzovich. Trustee Stanley, did you want to open discussion?
Sure. I don't know that it necessarily requires a lot of discussion, and it's not really. I can tell you my opinion, but I think that perhaps, I don't know if you get a chance to share yours as well. I think it's just good protocol, and it's a nice thing to do, and it's also important for us to establish those relationships. We have, 2 continuing and 1 new MLA for our school district, and those are really important relationships for us to always continue to work on and develop. And so I'm grateful that this came forward. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I don't have anything further to add to that. That was well said. Thank you for those words. Trustee Higginson?
Just, similar along the same lines, but also really reaching out to our new MLA, who I'm so sorry, the name has gone from my head. I'm really embarrassed about that right now, but just, it's really important for us to be proactive on building those relationships instead of reactive. So Adam Walker, thank you to my fellow trustees. This is what makes us a great board. So I just wanted to reiterate that I think our, being proactive in establishing those relationships is key. And I look forward to us building a new relationship with MLA Adam Walker and strengthening our existing relationships with MLA Sheila Malcolmson and Doug Routley. Look at me remembering names all over the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. I'm not seeing any further comments on the motion, so I'll call the question. Is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, seeing none, the motion carries unanimously. Moving on to 15.2, Vice Chair Barron, regarding the BCSTA budget feedback.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, just bringing forward this item on October 24th, 2020, I attended the BCSTA provincial councillors meeting as a provincial councillor, and the Finance and Audit Committee invited all member of boards of education to provide feedback to be used to develop BCSTA's 2020-2022 budget draft, which will be also presented to the February 2021 Provincial Council for receipt. Boards will have additional opportunities to provide feedback at that meeting, and again prior to the adoption of the budget by April 2021 Provincial Council. Feels like that's a long ways away, but it's just around the corner. I'm bringing it forward today to see if trustees have any feedback or any questions that they would like me to send forward to our Finance and Audit Committee. The deadline for all questions and feedback is Monday, December the 14th. These items are attached to the agenda and were also sent out through email prior. And so I just wanted to see if trustees had any questions or feedback at this time.
Great, thank you. Do we have questions or feedback to share with Trustee Barron? I'm not seeing any at this time. So what I would suggest to the board is that if you do have feedback, what we could do is, given the deadline is 2 weeks away, you can reach out to Trustee Barron and provide that feedback so that she can share it back through that feedback loop as our provincial councillor rep. Is there anything else, Trustee Barron?
Yes, through the chair, just to reiterate, even if we don't provide any feedback or have any questions at this time, again, just to reiterate, we will be having further opportunities. The Finance and Audit Committee just wants to make sure that we have ample time to be able to consider the budget while it's in draft form prior to adoption. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our business for 15.2. For information on the agenda this evening, we have the vandalism report as 16.1 on page 116. 16.2 contains our board's motions report on page 124, and don't believe we have trustee committee reports this month. Are there any questions on those for information items? I'm not seeing any. Question period. Ms. Matthews, do we have any questions this evening? No questions this evening, so we'll move into adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Trustee Stanley, seconded by Trustee Barron. Anyone opposed? Great. That concludes our meeting this evening at 6:57. Thank you, everyone.